Hey everybody, in today's video we're going to do a Challenge Peter tutorial. This challenge was sent in by one of my Deep Space Course students over on HowTo. Patricia was having a lot of issues trying to bring out the data in this photo. And I'll admit, when I first looked at it, I said, whoa, I've got my work cut out for me because this looks pretty challenging. But today I'm going to show you how I took this photo and turned it into this image right here. Pretty remarkable, right? And if you want to learn even more after today's video, you can head over to howtube.com and go to my video series and check out my Deep Space course. This now has over 100 videos that go through the entire process, from picking the best camera gear, how to actually set it up in the field, and of course how to post-process. And my number one goal is always to simplify all this stuff as much as possible. And I show you how to do these things step by step with you. So if that sounds interesting, you might want to check that out. But let's get on to the tutorial right now. Alright, let's start off here in Photoshop and take a look at the raw data. Because if you've been following me for a while, you know in the past, I would have been using Photoshop because I didn't want to learn PixInsight because it was so overwhelming. And if I was using Photoshop, what I would normally do is start off with the levels or curves. A curves tool, for example, I can use the black point dropper and then click somewhere in the photo. That fixed not only the contrast, but the color cast to some extent. And now we can actually see the elephant trunk nebula right there, although it's still pretty subtle. The problem with this workflow is that because there are no flats included in the stack, we have a really heavy vignette, and we're just going to exacerbate it trying to stretch the image. This is where the power of PixInsight really comes in handy. So for those of you that are still on the fence about using it, I'd recommend at least getting the free trial and follow along with me today. We'll start off in PixInsight and open up that same TIFF file, and I want to show you how fast and easy this can be. First, I'll hit Controller Command A. That's an auto stretch of the data. Because this was a modified Canon sensor though, the image has a very strange color cast. And one way to fix that is with the Screen Transfer Function tool, which you can either find from the Process Explorer on the left, or up top by Process, All Processes, Screen Transfer Function tool, right here. And a very fast way to fix the color cast is to turn off the chain link button right here. This will allow PixInsight to manually adjust your red, green, and blue color channels independently. So now that we've turned off the chain link, we can click on the nuke again. That's the same thing as hitting Control A. And look at that. We have now color corrected the image pretty well. And if I zoom in again, you can really start to make out the elephant nebula, which shows Patricia captured some great data. However, there is a better and more accurate way to fix the colors in your image if you're still struggling. For this though, we will need two different tools. First is under Script, Image Analysis, Image Solver. Think of this as a plate solving tool built into the software. The problem I have today is that this data was sent over to me in a TIFF format which stripped out all of the relevant metadata which might have been there to begin with. And I'm going to need to figure out that metadata for myself. So the first thing we need to do is figure out the right ascension, declination, and date and time of this image. Thankfully, I know that Patricia captured the data in 2023 on June 19th, I believe it was. And because that's right around the summer solstice, we probably only had a few hours of data taken around midnight, so I'll put this to 0. Close enough anyway. For the right ascension in the deck, I have no idea what that is off the top of my head, so we have a handy search function right here. I can tell you right now it's not going to know what elephant trunk is, so you have to figure out the scientific name of the object. And the easiest way to do that is just to Google it. So if we head over to Google, we can type in elephant trunk nebula, we verify that is the object we're trying to photograph, and it says right here, IC1396. Alright, now that we know that this is called IC1396, we can put that in right here. Then we'll click on the search button, and we could choose either one really, it shouldn't matter. I'll click on the first one, then hit OK. Again, the reason we're doing this is because the software has to know where the telescope was pointed to. That way it knows what stars it's looking at. But that's only half the equation. We also need to tell it the pixel size of the camera, as well as the focal length of the telescope. And this can be another tricky problem if you're editing somebody else's data. So what you need to do is either ask them what telescope they used, or if it's your own telescope, just Google it and figure out the focal length. Patricia was using the ASCAR 107 PHQ, and if we head over to Agena Astro, this is a very fast way to figure out all the specs. right there we see the focal length, 749 millimeters. I can now put that in here as our focal length. And to be clear, you always want to use the actual focal length with no 1.5 times crop or anything like that factored in. So just Google the focal length and input that right there. For the camera, she used an EOS R from Canon. And I'd recommend you Google your camera model plus Digicam DB for digital camera database. It should bring you right to where you need to go. Here we have the Canon EOS R, which is a great Milky Way camera. And for the pixel pitch, that's the field we're looking for. This has a pixel pitch of 5.34, which are actually very large pixels, which is a good thing for Milky Way especially. Okay, now that we know it's 5.34, we'll go back to PixInsight. I've already got that put in right here. And that's all there is to it. We can now click on OK, and it should go through and do a plate solve. If you're watching this video and you haven't installed PixInsight yet, or you're just getting used to that software, you might encounter an error right now, something to do with a Gaia, and it'll say something along the lines of no Gaia database found. If you encounter an error like that, I'd recommend you check out my PixInsight for Dummies course here on YouTube. I will show you how to download those databases and install them into PixInsight without overloading your computer, downloading a bunch of files you don't actually need. Anyway, once this completes, we can then move on and actually do our scientifically accurate color correction. Although I should caveat that statement because in this case, the Canon camera that's being used had an HA modified sensor. And what we'll see is that's not even really an option to choose from. And therefore, I don't really know how accurate these colors can be considering we're not giving it as much information as it needs. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, so let's hold off until this is done. Okay, we got the green text. It says it was successful. Now we're ready to move on. The next step is to grab SPCC or Spectrophotometric Color Calibration, again, either from your Process Explorer or from your processes up top. And this is what I was just talking about a second ago. If we look at our red, green, and blue filters, we need to choose the proper filter and camera from the list. There's really not that many choices though. There's a lot of older Canon cameras, nothing really all that new. And there's not even any H-alpha modified sensors to choose from. So the closest thing that I can figure is the Canon Full Spectrum. And when it has the R there, that doesn't mean Canon EOS R, that means red. So I'm going to choose Full Spectrum Red for the red filter, Full Spectrum for the green filter, and for the blue as well. However, maybe you have a Full Spectrum modified camera and you're using the Optolong L Enhance filter. You would want to choose that from the list instead for red, green, and blue. Or maybe you're trying to use a Nikon camera. And in that case, again, there's really not many new options here. There's a D90, which is like, I don't even know how old at this point. So hopefully, if you want to make your life easier, you do have a Sony CMOS sensor, which would tend to be the newer ZWO cameras usually. You could also go down to the region of interest here and manually specify your background, which I'll just try today to see what happens. For this, you need to add a new preview window up top here by clicking this little document icon looking button. Then you want to find somewhere that's just kind of background dark sky, which is hard because this is all H-alpha data here in the background, but maybe somewhere over here. I'll just drag that out. Now that we've chosen a preview, we can choose it from the left-hand little menu here, and we'll drag and drop this preview name to the region of interest where we see a plus button. If you did that correctly, it should input some fields here. Again, you don't have to do that step. I normally don't bother, but today I thought we'd give it a try. Before you go any further, make sure you click on your elephant stack or whatever it's called again so you see the full image. Otherwise, it won't work properly. Okay, so we've got everything configured. You could always change the white reference as well from average spiral galaxy to, I think, photon flux. If I remember correctly, that might work better for narrowband. I'd recommend, though, if you want to learn all this kind of stuff, check out Adam Block's videos. He knows everything there is to know about PixInsight, and he'll give you all the info you need to know. But for right now, we'll just keep it pretty basic, and we'll drag and drop our triangle on the photo. Again, the whole point of going through all this extra work is to theoretically get more accurate colors. But because I'm not even choosing the correct camera here from the list, there's a good chance this isn't going to look any better than that initial color correction we did with the screen transfer function tool. When SPCC is finished, you should see a line with a bunch of green dots. Hopefully the green dots are clustered around the line. If they're really spread out all over the place, that's not a good sign. Today, this looks really good to me. So we'll close out of that. The image looks pretty insane right now. But the reason that's happening is because you have to remember that the SPCC affected this screen transfer function. What I'm trying to say here is just turn on the chain link button again and nuke the photo. And that will fix the weird glitch right there. And now we have actually color corrected the data in our photo. However, the sides of the image have a strange kind of amber color, and the center of the image looks pretty good, so I guess we'll stick with it. But really, it's not that much different than what we had just a few minutes ago if I just undo all this stuff. You know, that's what we could have done in 2 seconds, and this is what we did after all that additional work. So there's not really that big of a deal. I just wanted to make sure I was as thorough as possible today. Okay, so we fixed the color cast and the contrast to some degree, but now we have another problem staring us in the face. That is the heavy vignette and the dust spots. These could have been corrected with a proper set of flat frames. So for those of you that are getting photos like this fairly often, I do recommend that you start taking a good set of flats and including them with your stack. Theoretically, that will completely even out the final image and you won't ever see all this junk around the frame. Alternatively, you can use tools like dynamic background extraction here in PixInsight. Also, the GradientXterminator tool, which I've shown some of you guys in the other videos. These are all designed to fix problems like this and make the Nebula stand out better. But frankly, I think all those tools really can ruin the image quality if you're not careful. So I want to show you another method in today's video that's intended to keep things simple and fast. Before we get there though, I'm going to run through my standard workflow. First, we'll go to our Process Explorer and we'll grab BlurXterminator. BlurXterminator is a plugin from Russell Crowe, and I'm sure if you're watching this, you've heard of it by now, but it works really well and it's definitely worth the money. So what you'd want to do really is just stick with the default settings most of the time, drag and drop your triangle on the photo, and then wait for that to complete. And there we go. We've now run BlurXterminator on the photo. The details stand out quite a bit better. The stars aren't quite as blurry. That looks great. The next step in the workflow is to run StarXterminator. Because the way I approach my workflow is I want those stars out of the way so I can really enhance the nebula or the galaxy in the background. So for this, we'll grab StarXterminator from our list, assuming you've downloaded it and installed it, and we're always going to generate a star image. That will give us a clean starless photo and a photo that just has the stars in it. All right, so we've got generate star image. We'll drag and drop our triangle on the photo again. Then the process console will show up. This might take anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes if you're using an Intel laptop like I am. But when that completes, we'll have our starless photo, just like this. And that looks great. So now we can really start to see what we're working with. You're also going to have your stars photo right here. So at this point in the workflow, we've fixed the colors, we fixed the contrast, we ran BlurXterminator and then StarXterminator. We're fixing all the problems that we can in PixInsight. Now we need to actually stretch this data, because technically, if I grab our screen transfer function tool real fast, this is actually what the photo looks like. It's still black. It's in a linear state, as they call it. So we need to actually apply the stretch to the image. The way we're going to do that is we're going to grab the histogram transformation tool and the screen transfer function tool. Again, you can get both of these from the Process Explorer on the left or up top. Once you have both tools, turn on the check mark at the bottom of each window. That just makes sure that it's actually doing what you expect it to do. Next, click on your starless photo. And to keep this as non-destructive as possible, we're going to duplicate this image here in the background. The fastest way to do that is to click this button right here, which says Duplicate Image. The reason I'm doing that is because I want an image that still has the linear data in case I ever need it, which I can now minimize. And I want a new version that I can save as a TIFF that's stretched. So if you're ever in doubt about what you're about to do, just duplicate the image and you'll always have a backup. All right, so we've got our new elephant stack clone. The name is reflected here and here in both tools. Then what we can do is drag and drop our triangle from the screen transfer function window to the bottom of the histogram transformation window. And just hover over until you see the little hourglass icon and then let go. We see something happened here. So we'll click on the square button at the bottom of the histogram transformation window. That applies the stretch. Then we're going to clear out both of these tools to make sure there's no problems. I'll click on the reset button here and the reset button right here. That cleans everything up. We now have a nice histogram that you see there. And we did this on our cloned photo just to be as non-destructive as possible. So there we go. This is now the image that we have to work with. There's no stars in the way. It's been stretched. It's ready for some fun processing. Therefore, I'll go to File, Save As, and that file name is fine for right now. And be sure to save this as a TIFF file, because by default it tends to use XISF, which Photoshop doesn't understand what that is. So change it to TIFF, save it, and then we're going to save this as a 16-bit TIFF because the image has been stretched. We don't really need 32 bits anymore. Now that we have a saved 16-bit TIFF file, let's go back to Photoshop and load that up. Okay, so let's get back on track here. Generally, if you follow most people's workflows, they recommend you fix this weird gradient as soon as possible in your workflow, usually step number 1. And that's why they use the dynamic background extraction tool here in PixInsight. Again, we're not doing that way today because I think that tool is kind of a pain to use, and there's a much faster, easier way to do things, even though it might be a little bit later in the workflow than most people would like. For this, we'll right-click our background layer and then duplicate the layer. And you can call it whatever you want to, but I'm going to call it Gradient Fix. Then we'll go up to Filter, RC Astro, GradientXterminator. Of course, this is assuming that you've downloaded and installed GradientXterminator into Photoshop. If you haven't done that yet, no worries, you can just head over to Russell Croman's website, get the free trial, get it plugged in, and then follow along with us. Okay, assuming you've got GradientXterminator installed, you've got a few different choices here. There's a detail option, aggressiveness, and then balance background color. I will say that the background here is kind of greenish for my liking, so I am going to try to balance the background color. The detail, there's really not a lot of fine detail, it's kind of coarse to be honest, but I'll stick with medium for now. And we'll also do the medium for the aggressiveness, and then hit OK. We're just doing a test now to see if it looks good or not. And that actually looks pretty good. What we're trying to see is a flat image from corner to corner. Here's our before and after. It's definitely a lot better. The problem you might encounter though is if you have a very heavy fall off here in the corners, that could skew the algorithm. Or if you're photographing a really bright object like Orion, that core of Orion will really screw this up as well. If you want to learn more about how to deal with that problem, check out my Deep Space course where we get into all that kind of stuff. Today we've got it pretty easy though. Anyway, what I'm saying here is that if you encounter problems with GradientXterminator due to very heavy vignette, you could always crop in the image if you haven't done so already. I tend to do that last in the workflow, but I realize there are some problems with doing it so late. So for right now, it worked good enough. I'm not going to worry about that stuff. That looks good to me. If you think it could be a bit better though, you can always go up to your history and undo it just by clicking above GradientXterminator. And then try it again with some different parameters, or maybe crop in the image, whatever you want to do. But maybe I want to do aggressiveness of high. I can try that. I actually like that a bit better. It's now really flat from corner to corner, although it's also maybe muddying the image too much. So this is where you just have to try a few different options and see really what works best for your own image. Maybe I'll try low too, just to get an idea. In fact, I think I will stick with low, because that still retains some of this nice definition here, and I know I'm going to crop out this other junk later. So there we go, we found the best GradientXterminator. At this point, I really want to make the image pop, because it's still very flat. Before we go any further, let's hit Control-Shift-Alt-E, or Command-Shift-Option-E if you're on a Mac. That'll create a new layer, which we can call Dust Fix. This is of course assuming you have dust spots in your image. Then we'll grab the Remove tool from the left, assuming you have the newest version of Photoshop. This one works really well. If you don't have the Remove tool, that's fine. The Spot Healing Brush tool, the Patch tool, as well as the Clone Stamp tool, all work fine. I am going to be using the Remove tool though today, because it seems to work the best. And all I have to do is come over to my image here, click and drag over the dust spot, and look at that, it's gone. I'll do that for the dust spot over here as well. Maybe make it a bit smaller this time. That looks good. And we've got a few more stragglers down here. That'll work for me. And in just a few seconds, we remove all those dust spots without having to take the flat frames. Now we're ready to really make the image pop. So we'll hit Control-Shift-Alt-E again to create another new layer. Then we'll go up to Filter, Camera Raw Filter. I would recommend you start by increasing the white slider considerably just to see what you're working with. And when I do that, we can really start to appreciate the beauty of the image here in the background. Then I can bring down the black slider to add some contrast. Maybe actually add some contrast as well. Just move the sliders around and see what looks good to you. I would also recommend increasing the saturation considerably because the original image was pretty gray by comparison. That's really all I want you to do for right now, are the basic adjustments you see here. Don't touch texture and clarity quite yet. If you're feeling adventurous though, you could always minimize the basic tab and do some color grading as well. This can quickly ruin the image though, so give it a shot if you want to. The way it works is you have a midtones, shadows, and highlights wheel, and as you move the little dot away from the center to the different colors, you can radically change the mood of the photo. And this just depends on the colors and the feel that you want to go for. I kind of like maybe a little bit more blue or purple. And if you want to see your before and after, look for the little eye icon right here and click and hold on that to do a before and after. That was the midtones. Let's try the highlights next because I want some more red in those highlights. Yeah, that looks better there. Here's our before and after on that as well. Then we have the shadows. I don't want to touch those too much. And all I'm doing is going around on the wheel until I find a color balance that suits the photo. I think that looks pretty good right there. Okay, that's going to take some practice, so feel free to pause the video. And when you're done, we'll hit OK. And look at that. There's our before and after. That's just amazing how much better that looks. And after you do that, you might notice some more dust spots you didn't see before. If so, now's the time to fix them. And in fact, I'm going to get rid of this guy right here because I'm going to add the stars back in later anyway. All right, that guy is fixed. We also had some dust up here. You always got to double check these problems though, because there's a chance when you try to remove them, it actually makes it look worse if you're not careful. And in fact, it's really not doing a good job at fixing that one. It made it look way worse. So I need to probably try another tool in this case, maybe the patch tool or clone stamp. Clone stamp tool, if you hold down the Alt or Option key, you can choose a reference area and then click. Then you can let go of the Alt or Option key and just paint over the area that you want to blend in like that. I've also got another area over here to paint out. And up here. I gotta say, this has come a long way in just a few minutes. We started off with that, and now we got that. Pretty cool, right? I'm gonna save this image right now. And the number one problem that's staring us in the face is the grain. We could have fixed this at any time, but I chose to save this until it really became a problem. Maybe not the best idea, but at least now we can see a clear idea of how bad the grain is. We've got another easy way to fix that though. So if we've saved our image, we can go right back to PixInsight, go to File, Open, and then grab the new version right here. And with this new version, we're going to run NoiseXterminator, also from Russell Crowe, and that's like his fourth tool we've used today. Because this image does have a ton of noise in it, I'm probably going to stick with the default settings, which are pretty strong, and then drag and drop the triangle onto the photo. When NoiseXterminator is finished, I recommend you zoom all the way in and do a before and after and make sure it didn't ruin the photo. Usually it does a great job, and today is no different. That is a night and day difference in terms of the grain. You may have lost some finer details though if you're not careful with NoiseXterminator, so you might want to undo it, lower the denoise amount, increase the detail, and try it again. Because we had so much grain to deal with though today, I think that looks great. With the grain out of the way, you could always save this as another TIFF, bring that into Photoshop, and add some texture and clarity and a high pass, whatever else you want to do. We might as well just show that to be thorough today. So I'll save this as a new image. And now we'll load this one up. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to have as much flexibility as possible in terms of the workflow. If I notice a problem, I'm not shooting myself in the foot by not having a backup file. With this new clean photo, we could just go right back to the filter, Camera Raw filter and add some texture and clarity in the basic tab. That will enhance the nebula, but what I was afraid of is it's also going to bring out some of the underlying problems which you see throughout the photo. It looks like there is some color model, but a lot of this is just remnants of the stars. And so when we add the stars back in a few minutes, you probably won't see this stuff, but these are things you want to watch out for. And if I do a before and after here, you can see that the texture and clarity just make the elephant trunk stand out a bit better. If it's not looking good though, you can always cancel it. And I'm going to do that today actually. Normally that works better than it does here. Another option is if we right click and duplicate our background layer, we can create a new layer called high pass. Pretty standard stuff. And with a high pass layer, go up to filter, other, high pass. And then once you have the high pass window, it's going to turn gray. That's fine. Adjust the radius though until you can actually see the nebula standing out a bit better. It's going to change for all of us. I think in this case, a value of around maybe 12 pixels will work well. Then I'll hit OK. Then we'll change the blending mode from normal to either overlay, soft light, hard light even, whatever you want to do in this little field right here. I'll go with overlay. And there's our before and after. You can see we made the elephant trunk stand out quite a bit nicer. You could continue to edit this photo if you feel the desire to. For example, you could add a curves adjustment layer, click on the hand tool, and then find an area you want to make darker, click and drag down. Find an area you want to make brighter, click and drag up. Again, this is using the hand tool on a curves layer. And when I do that, we can see that we've really probably put the image way too far in that direction. So I might want to adjust that curve a bit. But it's worth experimenting with this kind of stuff now, because when we add the stars back in, it's going to make it much harder to edit that background sky. I'm pretty happy with that. I could also even add a selective color layer though. And if you don't have all this stuff up here, I know I'm going through this kind of quickly, but I'm assuming you've seen a lot of my videos by now. You can get your adjustments tab by going to Window, Adjustments. That's the fastest way to do it. And again, we have all types of videos designed for every skill level in the Deep Space course. So if you want to take it slow, or if you want to take it fast, we've got that available over on HowTube. Anyway, with the selective color layer, I can find my main colors in the image like blues, and then move my sliders left and right until I find a nice color balance. This is a very powerful way to screw up the photo if you're not careful, because now we're starting to see some horizontal and some vertical banding in the image. So sometimes you have to take the color balance in the opposite direction to cover those problems up. That looks good for the blue color channel. We can try magentas as well. And when you're doing these changes, keep in mind that if you like them, you can always paint them in to specific areas. What do I mean by that? Well, let me just show you. If I had a new selective color layer and I target the red color channel, let's see if there's even any red. Yeah, here on the edges. Maybe I only want this effect to apply over here. So I can make whatever changes I want. Then I hit Control or Command I. That should invert the layer mask and turn it black. That essentially turns off the lights. We can't see this selected color anymore. Then if we grab a white paintbrush, making sure that we have white selected here on our black layer mask, I can paint in where I want that color to apply, like so. Or you could do it right over here on the elephant's trunk or wherever you want to do that. I always recommend though, if you're going to be painting stuff in, you blur it out so that way it's not as obvious. Because right now, if we look at our layer mask, it looks pretty rough. So I'd go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. I don't want to blur it out too much, but that looks good right about there, about 100 pixels. And then finally, that looks really extreme, so I might want to turn down the opacity of this layer to just like 20% or something. I mean, this is really starting to come a long way, if you remember what we started off with. Therefore, I'm going to hit Control or Command S to save the image again. And this would be a great point, if you haven't already, to take a break, because we're about to add the stars back in. It would help if you can come back to the image in 5 or 10 minutes, look it over, and do any final adjustments you want to do. Assuming you're back from your little break, we can close out of all this stuff in Photoshop, go back to PixInsight, And we're going to open up our final image right here that we just created. That looks awesome, besides the vignette, which we'll fix here in a minute. Then we'll go to Process Explorer again and grab the Pixel Math tool. When we have the Pixel Math tool selected, hopefully you remember the equation. This is thanks to Adam Block, who again I'd highly recommend you check out his videos. He knows a ton about PixInsight, and he does a good job of explaining it. Anyway, the equation that he came up with is combine, parentheses, and this is my part anyway, I just call everything Nebula, lowercase, comma, stars, comma, OP underscore screen. Then we do open close parentheses, and then another close parentheses. That might sound very confusing. It was for me at first, but let me explain what we're doing here. We're going to combine the Nebula photo that we have here with the stars photo that we have here using the operation of the screen blending mode. The problem is our photos are not named Nebula, all lowercase, and stars, all lowercase. So we need to do that next. For this, we can grab our nice looking nebula right here. We'll double click on the little left-hand menu. And this is how we can rename the photo. Again, it has to be case sensitive. We'll call that Nebula to match our equation. And then we'll go to our stars photo that was created by StarXterminator. And we'll also rename this one to stars, all lowercase. And one of the nice things about PixInsight is it has this bright green line, which is kind of a warning as far as I'm concerned. It's saying, hey, this image is still in what we call a linear state. It means it hasn't actually been stretched yet. And that's going to really screw up the equation we're about to do. So now would be a very good time to stretch our stars photo. For this, we'll go to our Process Explorer and grab the histogram and the screen transfer function tools, which we've used earlier. Then we'll click on the check marks on both tools. Click on our stars photo just to be safe. And now both tools should say stars, and they do. Then we drag and drop the triangle from the STF window to the histogram window to the bottom here. We click on the square of the histogram window. It makes everything go wild, that's okay. We reset both tools by clicking the button in the lower right, and we can get rid of those tools now. I know I went through that quickly, but I'm assuming you've already seen a lot of my other videos and you know the basics by now. Alright, so we've stretched our stars photo, and it's named stars, all lowercase. We've got our nice nebula photo here. We've got our pixel math window with the equation typed in. We can now create a new image under the destination tab. And last but not least, just click on the square. If you did everything correctly, it should go through. And look at that. That looks great. Gotta say, that turned out really well. Alright, we blended in our stars. My voice is starting to go out though, so I'm not going to show you the star reduction. We're going to skip over that. I cover that in the PixInsight videos and in my deep space course. All that's left is to go to File, Save As, and I'm going to call this Final Version 2. Make sure we're saving that as a TIFF, 16 bits per channel. And then we'll bring it right into Photoshop one last time. And the biggest problem I have are the corners, as you might expect. Again, you could have cropped that out right at the beginning. That probably would have been the better idea, to be honest, but I tend to save it here till the end when I can actually see what I have in the data. Then I'll bring in my corners using the crop tool from the left. And something like that should be pretty good, I would say. If you're still a little bit frustrated by the corners of your image though, well, we can right click and duplicate our background layer. And then go to Filter, RC Astro, GradientXterminator again. This time though, I like the colors that we have in the background, so I'm going to turn off Balance Background Color. It doesn't have to be very aggressive. The detail is probably fine. We'll try that. Yeah, I think that actually looks pretty good. Here's our before and after. My only real problem is that I like the glow the image had in the center, and now it's kind of lost that. I could theoretically add a layer mask, make it black with Controller Command I, take a white paintbrush, and just paint in the edges of the image to kind of reduce the vignette. I guess this is one way to do that, now that I'm thinking about it. Yeah, looks pretty good. Although I don't want that applying down there. And just like before, we'll go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. We're blurring out the layer mask so it's not as obvious. And there's a little bit of a fix right there. I think that looks good. We can now save this one last time, apply any final adjustments we want, including selective color, camera raw filter, a curve, whatever you think you need to do. And that's going to do it for today's video. I've shown you how to take an image starting with this and turning it into this image right here. That just shows you the power of this workflow and really the power of PixInsight once you can finally wrap your head around the interface, which for me took a long time. And if you enjoyed today's video and you actually managed to make it to the end, that's a pretty impressive feat. And if you want to learn more, be sure to check out my Deep Space course. There's over 100 videos kind of like this where I break down everything you need to know. I actually show you exactly what you need to do. And I assume you're just a normal person like me trying to have fun and create some nice looking photos. But that's all I've got for you today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in another video.